The last thing that we need to do with our application, at least right now, is add authentication so that we can protect the admin portion of our application. Now, way back in 3.3, we wrote a simple authentication system. So we are going to adapt that to our current application. And really, it's going to be quite simple. The only thing that we really need to do is adapt the login page to use our controller and view instead of putting everything inside of a single file. So let's start with that. And we're just going to fly through this because we've already talked about this authentication stuff. So we're going to adapt it now to our app. So inside of 4.10, not inside of its admin folder, we're going to create a file called login.php. This is going to be our login controller. And the reason why it's not going to be inside of admin is because the login page really isn't part of the admin section. It's there for anybody to be able to try to log in. So that is why it's not inside of admin. Now let's take the contents of our index and let's paste that in because we do need to require. We don't really need any of this other stuff, although we might use the view bag. But the view does need to be login, and we aren't going to pass anything as the model. So we're going to start with that. And let's go ahead and create our view as well. So once again, this is not going to be inside of the admin folder. So we will create a new file, login.view.php. And let's take the markup from the original login.php. And let's paste that in. Now, if I remember correctly, there are some issues with this markup. I don't think it's going to really affect anything, but let's see if we can clean this up a little bit, because here's a form and here's a form. So we need to decide which form is the real form, and it looks like that one is. So we have a form there that's inside of a div with a class of row, and I'm looking at, the lines that line up. I don't see anything connecting that one. So we should be able to get rid of that div with a class of row. That looks okay. And we don't really need this other one either. So we can get rid of that as well. Now these still aren't lining up, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Let's change the H1 to login so that the user knows that this is the login page, and that will be okay, at least for right now. So there's our view, and we had the status here. Let's go ahead and use our view bag here. So if view bag status is set, then we're going to output that. So we will do that there. And then we need to work on our controller. So we'll go back to the original login PHP, and we will grab all of that other code and paste that into our controller. Now, the very first thing we need to do is set our session. So let's do that. We're not going to set the title because we don't need that. We aren't going to require any of these things. The config just had the username and password. We, of course, need to adapt that to what our config is set up as. But then we do need some functions that we need to pull into our app. So we will do that here in a moment. And one of those is user authenticated. So I guess now's the time to do that. Those are inside of the INC folder at the root of htdocs. So if we go to functions, then we have the authenticate user. So let's go ahead and copy that. Ideally, we would put these authentication-based functions inside of another file. We could call it auth or something like that. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to add them to our current functions.php. And there's a few other ones too. So let's go back There's the is user authenticated. We do use that. We also use the ensure user is authenticated. But I think that that's it. I think everything else was just for other lessons. So let's copy those and we will paste them into our current functions PHP file as well. And we should be done there. So let's close that. Now let's go back to login. We are calling is user authenticated, and then we are redirecting to admin PHP. We want to redirect to our admin folder. So let's do admin/, and we'll see if that gets us where we want to go. We do not need to die anymore because that is automatically done in the redirect function. We also have a function for checking for post. So let's use that so that we don't have to type all of that out anymore. We are filtering the email. We'll still do that because that validates that we have an email, but we do need to validate our password. So we'll use our sanitize function, and that should take care of that. Then we will authenticate user. We will set the session email to the provided email address. We will redirect back to admin, so admin/, and we don't need to die. Otherwise, we set the status. So that was viewbag status, and we did that a few lines below as well. So let's just copy and paste. There we go. So that should be it, I would think. We will definitely find out. We do need to visit the authenticate user because we need to modify that so that it's going to work with our config. But we'll get to that in a moment because we need to go to our admin section and we need to add the call to that ensure user is logged in. So let's open up our functions file and ensure user is authenticated. So inside of every file, inside of our admin, we need to add this to our controllers. So the first thing we need to do is session start. Then we will require app PHP. Then we will call our function. So ensure user is authenticated. So let's just copy those 3 lines and we're going to paste them in where we have the require because we need to require as well as start session and check that the user is authenticated. So with that done, we do need a logout controller. We don't need a view because there's nothing to view with the logout. So let's create a new file. We'll call this logout.php, and we will take the contents of our previous logout, and let's just copy that and paste that in. So there we go. And we don't need to die, once again, because redirect is going to do that. We do not need to require our functions, although we do need to require our app. So let's copy that over. And we will put that after we unset and destroy our session. Then we redirect to login. We could redirect to index. Either way would be fine, in my opinion. I'm going to leave this as login. Okay, so let's close all of the files. Let's see if there's anything that needs to be saved. It doesn't. So now we need to focus on what we have inside of our functions, because how we authenticate the user is going to be a little bit different. We aren't going to be using the username and password that is inside of our config. Instead, our config is set up so that the users, well, hello, that's the wrong one. The users is in an array. We have an array of users and then the email address and the password. So I'm going to open up functions next to it so that we have a reference over here. Let's see if I can move this over a little bit, because really I'm just focused on what we have as far as the structure of config. So we want to authenticate our user, and we want to try to grab the user from the config with the provided email address. So we could do something like this. We could say user equals we'll say config, and our users are at the key of users. So we'll do this. We'll say users, that pulls in our users, and then since we have this array of users, we can say email as the key. Although that's a little cryptic, so let's break this up into multiple lines. So the first thing we will do is get our users. So what we have assigned to this users variable is this associative array. So each key inside of users is going to be an email address. So we could actually do this. We could check to see if that email address is inside of our users. So we're going to use isSet. We'll say users, and then for the key, we will use email. And if this doesn't exist, or if it is not set, then that user doesn't exist. So we just need to return false. There's nothing else that we need to do there. And if we do have a user, then we just need to get the password, which is what we've done here. So we could do this password, or rather user password equals, and then users with the key of email, that gets the value for the provided email address. And then we just compare the passwords. We don't have to compare the email addresses anymore because we've essentially already done that. We have verified that the user at least exists. So if the user does exist and then we compare the password, then of course that user has logged in. Okay, so that was actually easier than I was planning on. So let's test this out. Let's go to login.php. And we will log in as admin at admin.com. Password is 1234. And there is something wrong. The use of undefined constant user password. And that's because I did not use a $sign there. Let's go back. We can actually refresh this and it takes us to our list. So we logged in and we should be able to go to the create and let's recreate JavaScript. So hopefully that still works. It does. So now let's log off. So we'll go back and we'll say log off, or log out rather. That will log us out. We get redirected back to login. That's what we had said. But now let's try to access our create and edit and delete from admin. So the first is the index. We'll just go to straight up admin, and it tried to redirect us, but the URL is incorrect. It tried to take us to log in inside of admin, which of course doesn't exist. So we're going to need to fix that, but we can do that in a moment. Let's test create, same thing. Let's test edit and delete. So at least those resources are protected. We just need to set up the redirection so that it is correct. And we could approach this in a couple of different ways, but I'm going to take the easy way out. You know, this ensure user is authenticated. We are only using that from within admin. So I'm just going to do this // and that's going to work then. Now, if we had other resources that were protected that were at a level deeper than admin or within a subfolder of another subfolder of our project, then this would not work and we would definitely need to rethink that. However, at this point in time, this is going to be just fine. Now and there it works. Now we can't use our app path because that is for the path on the file system itself. That's not a URL that's going to be requested from the browser. So that's the difference here. We are setting an HTTP header, which is going to be loaded by the browser. We are not telling the browser that we want you to go to this file on our file system. That's a security risk, actually. So we can't use that app path. However, we could take the same idea and create a constant that would then be used in the same way for HTTP requests. But once again, for our current purposes, what we have is going to be fine.